tires screamed before Ethan saw the shape. The forest went silent, like a switch flipped. Headlights sliced the pines, and something tall slid across the road without sound. "Ethan," said Caleb, "did you see that?" Wind shoved the truck, then stopped. Mist crawled over the asphalt. A sour smell rose from wet bark. Caleb said it was a deer, but his voice shook. The radio spat static, then a whisper that was not theirs. Needles rattled against glass. A long smear glowed on the hood. Not blood, not sap. Ethan's goal was simple now. Keep them alive. Prove they were not losing their minds. The trees leaned in like listeners. Breath fogged the cab. The engine ticked, then stalled, then caught. From the ditch, two faint eyes reflected, too high, too steady. Ethan said, "Stay still." The forest answered with one low breath, and the eyes blinked sideways. The engine held a shaky idle while the forest listened. Ethan said, "We call it in." Caleb nodded, but kept staring at the ditch. The radio hissed, then clicked, then gave a burst of voices, cut in half. A name, a road number. Silence again. The smell on the hood sank into the rain, sweet and wrong. Their goal narrowed to proof and escape. A branch popped in the timber, clean as a bone snap. Ethan steadied his hands. He framed the scene in his mind. Angles, tracks, the smear. Caleb said. It looked back like it knew us. The words hung heavy. Far off, a single owl called. Then stopped as if warned. The ditch bubbled with runoff. The eyes were gone now. The feeling of being watched was not. Ethan raised the camera on his phone, and the screen flickered like a bad dream. What would the lens show when the forest chose to speak? They drove 10 slow yards and stopped again. The road curved into trees that pressed close, bark slick as glass. Ethan said, "If it crosses again, I need the angle." Caleb said, "I need us alive." The truck heater clicked and coughed. A shape kept pace in the tree line, not running, not hiding, just there. The rain lightened to a hiss. Needles shook once and held. Ethan's fear sat beside him like a passenger. He tightened his seatbelt. The radio chirped, and a dispatcher said, "Identify," then vanished. The tires rolled, crushed gravel sang, then fell quiet. The forest returned each sound softer than before, like it was learning their rhythm. Caleb said, "We turned back." The curve ahead was a mouthful of dark. Ethan eased forward anyway, because proof was in the next 10 seconds. Who waited inside that curve? And what would it ask from them? A fallen log blocked the shoulder where the curve ended. Too clean, too straight. Ethan said, "That wasn't here before." Rain ticked softer on the roof. Steam rose from the exhaust and curled under the log. An exit was being removed piece by piece. Caleb said, "It wants us to stay." The words felt true. They stepped out together. Cold hit like a wall. The smell from the hood drifted back on a lazy wind. Ethan knelt to the wood and found claw-like grooves. Not deep, but deliberate. The forest dimmed as a cloud slid over the moon. Somewhere uphill, a footstep. One, then none. He snapped a photo and counted. 1 to 5. No return sound. Caleb said, "Please, let's go." The log groaned, though no weight pressed it. Who had placed the barrier, and how far would it go to keep them? They shoved the log together and felt it resist like muscle. Ethan said, "Push on 3. They pushed. It rolled an inch, then stopped against nothing. The radio flared with a voice that sounded like Ethan's own, saying, "Don't." He froze. Caleb said, "You heard that?" Wind slipped through the pines, but the needles made no sound. The hush felt alive. A small stone skipped down the slope and tapped his boot. He looked up, and the darkness shifted like a living curtain. The rain ended on a clean line as if cut. Ethan's heart marched in his throat. He reached for the keys, and the keys were not there. The truck lights dimmed, then brightened, as if something breathed through the wires. Caleb said, "It knows us." The forest went even quieter. What waits on the other side of a silence that learns your name? Gravel spat, and the truck leaped forward as something broke branches behind them. Headlights jittered. The forest ran beside the road like a wall. Ethan said, "Hold tight." Caleb said, "It's after us." The radio chewed words and spit them as echoes. Wind hammered the cab, then died, then returned from the opposite side. A heavy stride matched their speed. Never hurried, never tired. Ethan's fear shook loose and turned sharp. He wanted distance and proof in the same breath. Caleb said, "I don't trust that silence." The tree line flickered with pale glints, too high to be eyes on a deer. A stone hit the door with a clocked knock, placed not thrown. The engine coughed once and caught. A side mirror tilted on its own. Ethan said, "It wants us to look back." He steadied the wheel and saw fresh tracks ahead, crossing wet asphalt like a message. They slid into a turnout beneath a rusted overlook. The engine idled rough. Rain softened to a faint hiss. Ethan said, "We catch our breath." Caleb nodded and stared at the ridge. Steam lifted from the hood in slow ribbons. Their hands trembled in the quiet. Ethan felt guilt crawl up with the heat. He had dragged them deeper for proof. Caleb said, "You're not alone in this." The words landed warm and heavy. A faint hum came from the guardrail like a wire singing. A feather lay on the wet paint, black and glossy, longer than a forearm. Ethan said, "That wasn't wind." They shared a tight, short laugh that died fast. He pocketed the feather like a secret. The hum faded. The sky brightened a shade, then dimmed again. Calm held, but the next move waited. What kind of thing leaves gifts that feel like warnings? They rolled back onto the road. The hum returned inside the cab, not in the air, but in the bones. Ethan said, "It's in front of us." The beams hit a shape, between trunks, tall and narrow, wings held like a coat folded wrong. Caleb said, "No." The shape did not flinch. It studied. The radio went flat and dead. The truck slowed as if hands pressed the bumper. Ethan fought the pedal and felt nothing changed. A cool voice inside his skull said a word he did not know. Control slipped like wet rope. The shape blinked sideways, not down. Caleb said, "It knows we hear it." The rain stopped on a line again. Silence rose and crowded the cab. The hum swelled and pushed tears to the edge of sight. The shape stepped once, and the trees leaned with it. What bargain was the road already making for them? They backed away slow and took an old service lane. A lantern burned in a cabin by the creek. An older voice called, "Inside, now," Ruth said. "You brought the tune with you." Ethan felt the name fit, though he had not heard it. Caleb said, "We need help." The cabin smelled of cedar and iron. Ruth poured tea with hands that shook and did not spill. She spoke of nights when the forest went quiet before a mine collapsed. She named the ridge and the old road and the thing that watched both. Ruth said, "It does not chase, it chooses." Ethan heard his own breath count the seconds. A map on the table showed crossed marks like stitches. Ruth set a finger on tonight's road. She said, "It learns what you fear, then plays it back." The lantern guttered once. Which fear would it borrow first and make real? Ruth folded the map and pressed it into Ethan's hands. She said, "There is a cut path to the fire tower. Height breaks its hold." Caleb said, "Then we climb." Ethan's doubt scraped hard. The feather in his pocket felt like a pulse. Rain deepened and drummed on the roof. The lantern threw a ring on the floor, like a mark to stand in. Ruth said, "Do not answer if it speaks your name." The creek swelled outside and carried a log past like a silent boat. Ethan chose motion over fear. He rose and felt the decision steady his spine. Caleb said together. They stepped into the cold and the night took their heat fast. The road up was black and slick and narrow. The tower would cut the sky if they reached it. What waited at the stairs if the voice arrived before the dawn? The climb began under a softer rain. The forest breathed slow. A pickup idled on the service road ahead. A man waved them over with easy confidence. Mason said, "Heard you on the scanner. Tower's locked. I've got a key." Relief slid in like warm air. Ethan said, "You know this road?" Mason smiled without showing teeth. He kept his eyes on the tree line, then on Ethan's pocket where the feather hid. Caleb said, "Why help us?" Mason said, "I hate what it does to folks." The quiet felt staged, like a set waiting for a cue. A little metal charm hung from Mason's mirror, a wing marked with lines. Ethan noticed fresh mud on his bumper that matched the turnout. Calm held in a thin shell. What made Mason arrive before anyone else knew where to find them? Mason led them up a rutted path. Conversation found small stones to trip on. He said, "Tower's this way." Shorter than the map shows. Ethan felt trust arrive and argue with caution. Caleb said, "You from town?" Mason said long time ago. He asked about the eyes, the smell, the hum, each word placed like a survey pin. Ethan answered in short bits. Caleb laughed once, and the sound broke clean, almost joy. The rain eased to a mist that made halos of their lights. Mason said, "You two got nerve." His hand brushed the rail and left a dark smear that did not look like mud. Ethan's chest warmed and cooled with each step. The night seemed to lean back and listen. Why did Mason already know the things they had not said out loud? They paused at a switchback where the forest opened to a view. The rain stopped. The valley lights blinked like tired eyes. Mason said, "It warns before it takes." Ethan said, "It chose our road." Mason said, "Because you looked back." Caleb said, "Everyone would look." Mason's tone turned soft and certain. He said, "Not everyone hears the second voice." Ethan felt the words land too neatly. His belief wrestled with anger. He wanted to keep people safe and prove the truth. Mason held both in his palm like coins. He stepped closer. He said, "Tell me the word it spoke." Ethan tasted iron and kept silent. Caleb said, "You don't get to ask that." The wind did not move, but the trees complained anyway. Who had given Mason the right to talk like the forest? At the tower gate, Mason produced a key that did not match the lock. He smiled and lifted the latch already opened. Caleb said, "You said locked." Mason said, "Lucky night." The gate swung and banged once. A voice from the dark said Ethan's name in a perfect copy. Ethan flinched. Mason said, "Answer it so it knows you're not afraid." Caleb grabbed Ethan's sleeve. He said, "No." Mason's hand moved fast and took the feather from Ethan's pocket. He held it up and the hum swelled through metal. Ethan said, "Give it back." Mason stepped backward into shadow and left the gate wide. He said, "It follows what belongs to it." The tower stairs vibrated like a plucked string. Trust cracked underfoot. What did Mason just invite to climb with them? Mason's taillights slid away down the service road, small and calm. The feather was gone. The hum stayed. Ethan felt the shape of the betrayal more than its details. Caleb said, "He wanted it to find us." The tower groaned and answered like a throat. Ethan climbed anyway, each step a strike against fear, against shame for trusting. The wind returned and pushed from odd angles. He thought of Ruth's warning and kept his mouth shut. Caleb said, "We finish this, then we warn everyone." The top deck swayed and the forest moved as a single body. Ethan set the map down and pinned it with his palm. He understood the pattern in the X marks now. The road was not random. This was a path laid out years ago. What would the forest demand for telling them the truth at last? Wind thinned around the tower and left a hollow quiet. Metal ticked as it cooled. Ethan held the map and traced the X marks with a slow finger. Caleb said, "We trusted the wrong man." The valley lights blinked like tired eyes. The air smelled of wet steel and cedar. Guilt pressed down and then shifted into focus, Ethan said. He opened the gate for it. The hum in the rails answered like a low choir. He matched the old marks to tonight's road and saw a pattern, a loop that closed on the tower. Caleb said, "We were driven here." The sky brightened behind a cloud and went dim again. The truth stood at the edge of his thoughts and waited. If the tower is the center, then the path was never random. What has been calling them sits where the map ends. The smell of cedar sparked a memory like a match. Ethan saw Ruth's lantern and the old photos on her wall. A mind shift number. A date carved into wood. Her voice folded over the present and the past. Ruth said, "It goes quiet before it takes or spares." Rain on her roof became rain on the tower. Tea steam became tower fog. She pointed at a black feather in a frame. She said, "It left this when my brother never came home." Ethan felt the same hum pass through both rooms. "Then and now," Caleb said. "So warnings can be traps." Paper crackled under Ethan's hand and became the map again. He heard the second voice carry a word he could not hold. The memory clicked into place like a latch. The thing does not hunt at random. It marks routes for chosen nights. A low call rose from the trees and pressed against the platform. Ethan faced the dark and did not speak. The hum wrapped his ribs like wire. He let the silence stretch until it hurt. The rails vibrated with a patient rhythm. Caleb said, "It wants your answer." Ethan said, "It wants consent." The word tasted like rust and truth. A pause widened and showed him what stood beneath. An old bargain people kept alive. He counted breaths and kept his mouth shut. The wind carried a dry rustle, like heavy wings folding. He felt his own heartbeat slow to match the hum, and then break from it. He stepped back from the edge. He said, "I'm done being led." The air lightened a shade. Power moved from the road to the deck under his feet. If silence is a leash, he just slipped it. Headlights crawled along the service road far below and went dark. A voice rose on a handheld radio left by the stairs. Mason said, "You climbed for it." "Good." His tone was calm and sure. He spoke like a pastor in an empty room. He said, "It spares what listens. It keeps the land honest," Ethan said. "You feed it people." Mason laughed once, soft. He said, "I guide the stubborn to where they hear." He named losses as if they were tallies. He called them warnings, not deaths. Caleb said, "You chose us." Mason said, "You chose yourselves the moment you looked back." The words were neat and cruel. The line between help and harm blurred to gray. The radio clicked off and left a clean ache. If he is not the only one, how many roads lead to the same gate? Ethan set the map flat and drew a new line with his finger. It cut across the loop and broke the pattern. He felt fear fade and purpose rise. Caleb said, "We end it." The wind shoved once and then eased, like it heard. Ethan said, "We warn the ridge, pull the siren, flood the road with voices louder than its hum." The plan was simple and hard. He would act, not follow. He folded the map and tucked it close. Ruth's warning echoed like a bell. "Do not answer if it speaks your name," he said. "We go down fast and we do not stop." The tower creaked like it approved. The forest did not speak. The truth had sharpened them both. The next step was motion. Their path no longer belonged to the thing waiting below. They hit the stairs two at a time. Boots rang on steel. Air thinned and filled their chests with cold fire. The forest held its breath. Ethan said, "No names, no answers." Caleb said, "Copy." The hum rose from the ground and matched their steps like a drum. A light flickered near the ridge siren box and died. Metal pop, cable hiss. Their breaths clipped the dark like blades. The service road showed fresh tracks that were not tires. A shape moved without hurry along the tree line, steady as a metronome. Ethan tasted iron and rain. The tower groaned behind them as if it missed them already. He looked to the ridge and felt the pull of the lever like a handshake. He said, "We reach it before the next silence." The next, silence gathered like a wave about to break. They reached the ridge fence. Wires sang with the same hum. Ethan said, "It wants the lever quiet." Caleb said, "Then we pull loud." A voice spoke his name from the dark, perfect in tone and shape. He held his breath until the urge burned out. The shape stepped closer and paused, as if to measure mercy. Ethan said, "You do not choose us." The forest shook a little, then stilled. A low reply rolled across the ground and set the fence buzzing. Caleb said, "We are not yours." They pushed through the gate and climbed the short ladder to the siren box. The panel stuck. The night pressed in like heavy cloth. Ethan's hand hovered over the switch. He heard his heartbeat click like a metronome. He said, "On my count." The count reached 1 and held. A lantern bobbed below and climbed fast. Ruth stepped from the dark with rain on her cheeks. She did not waste breath. Ruth said, "Pull it and keep pulling." The shape turned its long head toward her. Ethan said, "You shouldn't be here," Ruth said. "I should have been years ago." She crossed the fence with a calm that hurt to watch. She pressed her palm to the box and prayed a name that was not the forest's. The hum surged and tried to drown her voice. Caleb said, "Now." Ethan pulled the lever. The siren woke and screamed. The cry tore the quiet open. The shape flinched and held. Ruth smiled once at the sound. The siren stole her strength and she sagged to her knees. The cost arrived like a bill that had waited too long. The siren's scream shook the ridge. Air tore. The thing unfolded its wings like tarps in a storm. Ethan held the lever down with both hands. Caleb stood between Ruth and the fence. The shape advanced against the sound, slow and deliberate. It learned and leaned. Ethan said, "You do not own this road." The siren cycled higher and then higher again. Sparks snapped at the panel. The forest answered with a wave of moving branches. Rain hit sideways. Silence punched once and failed to land. Ethan dragged breath through fire and kept the lever pinned. The shape reached the fence and stopped, pinned by noise and light. He met its eyes and did not look away. He said, "Choose to leave." The siren peaked and held like a blade at the throat of the night. The siren wound down to a tired moan and clicked off. The ridge trembled and then settled. The shape lowered and folded into the dark. It did not vanish. It withdrew like a tide. Ethan let the lever go and felt his hands shake. Caleb said, "You held." Ruth sat back and breathed in small, careful sips. The air tasted like pennies and rain. "No one spoke for a long beat," Ethan said. "We broke its lesson." The fence no longer sang. The forest tried a small hush and failed to close over them. He looked at the road and saw it as a line they could redraw. The night did not forgive or bless. It simply opened. He said, "We warn the valley." The siren tower stood quiet, waiting to be used again. Dawn crept in slow and kind. The siren tower sat quiet and wet. The forest breathed like a tired animal. Mist lifted off the ridge in thin ribbons. Ethan listened to the hush and felt the ache inside it. Caleb stood near the fence and counted his breaths. Ruth leaned on the post and closed her eyes. No birds sang yet. The ground held the night like a memory that would not fade. Ethan said, "We are still here." The words were small and honest. Smoke from a distant burn curled into the pale sky. The storm had passed, but its shape stayed on their faces. He looked at the place where the shape had stood. Loss showed itself without sound. It was space, and it was weight. He knew what was gone, and what would not come back. They sat on the steps of the tower and let silence settle. Ethan traced a groove in the wood with his thumb. He replayed the night in short flashes. The hum in the rails, the feather in a thief's hand, Ruth's voice over the storm. Caleb said, We did not break. The words felt right and also heavy. Ethan thought of the ones the road had taken before. He saw faces he never met and felt the guilt anyway. He whispered, "I pulled the leap. I stayed." A small wind touched his cheek and left. He watched a lone crow pass over the trees. Life carried on with or without their witness. He accepted that truth with a slow breath. It would not be simple. It would not be cruel. They walked the service road down to the turnout. Ruth moved slow and sure. Ethan saw the overlook and felt time stretch thin, the place where fear had smiled at them. Caleb said, "We keep going." A memory met them in the curve like a person. It was the shape of Mason's back and the glow of his charm. Ethan did not stop with the picture. He stepped through it. The road let him pass with no demand, Ruth said. "Forgive enough to move, not enough to forget." The words landed soft and true. Ethan answered with a nod and a quiet yes. The echo of the night faded a little. The hurt stayed, but it changed color. He felt something loosen in his chest. It was not joy. It was release. They reached Ruth's cabin near the creek. The lantern sat cold. The room smelled of cedar and tea. Ethan saw the map on the table and the framed feather on the wall. He heard Ruth's lesson rise again. "Do not answer when it calls your name." The line came back like a bell from a far hill. Caleb touched the old photos with careful fingers. Ruth said, "People kept the story alive to warn, not to worship." Her tone was gentle and firm. Ethan felt the years in her words. He saw how they pointed forward, not back. He understood that warning was an act of love. He smiled without showing teeth. A small tear moved, and he did not hide it. Ethan folded the map with new lines drawn bold. He packed the siren codes Ruth kept in a tin. Caleb gathered batteries and a small radio. The plan was simple. They would post warnings at trailheads. They would teach the valley not to answer. Ethan said, "We start today." Caleb said, "We finish when it stops choosing our roads." Ruth nodded and placed a hand on each of them. The creek sang low and even. The sky brightened without glare. Ethan felt peace that did not erase pain. He let it sit beside the hurt. He walked to the door and opened it wide. The world outside waited without threat. It also waited without promise. He stepped into it anyway. Morning settled over the valley like a clean sheet. Roofs steamed in the light. The forest kept its voice low and kind. Ethan stood on the fire road and watched fog burn off the pines. Caleb joined him and said nothing. Silence did not threaten now. It held space for breath. Ethan thought of the night and the cost Ruth had paid. He felt the line between fear and duty grow clear. He whispered, "We changed the shape." Caleb heard and nodded once. A far mill started up and sent a soft hum across the ridge. The sound felt human and good. Ethan asked himself the hardest question. Was the price worth the morning he stood in now? They walked the trailheads one by one. They set small signs with simple rules. Do not answer the second voice. Do not look back when the silence leans in. They tightened each post and checked each path. Caleb said, "This is how we keep people." Ethan said, "This is how we keep ourselves." The motion felt like a promise kept. The sun moved, and the shadows turned gentle. A truck passed, and a hand lifted in thanks. They did not wave back. They were busy with the work. The road behind them grew smaller. The road ahead stayed open. Back at the cabin, Ruth set an old cassette on the table. She pressed play and the soft click filled the room. A voice came through the static. It was her brother from years before. He spoke of the quiet before the mind fell. He said, "Do not answer when it calls you like me." The room held the words like a prayer. Ethan closed his eyes and let them settle. Caleb bowed his head. Ruth stopped the tape and smiled, a tired smile. She said, Let this be the last time we need it. The line felt like a benediction. It also felt like a start. Days passed in small, steady ways. The town fixed fences and patched roofs. Kids biked the lane by the creek. The forest learned to sing again. Ethan and Caleb checked signs and spoke to hikers with calm voices. They did not tell the whole story. They told enough to keep people safe. At dusk, the ridge turned gold and then blue. The siren tower stood quiet and proud. Ethan felt the change inside him take root. He accepted the weight and the light together. He said, "We are different now." The words were not sad. Night returned soft and clear. The forest did not fall silent. It breathed and swayed and kept its music. Ethan stood at the edge of the trees. He held no feather and no fear. Caleb stepped beside him and touched the warning sign once. Neither spoke. A breeze moved through the needles like pages turning. Somewhere far off, an owl called and another answered. Ethan said, "Truth is not a thing to own." The line left his mouth and felt right. He turned from the trees and walked toward the road. The sound of their steps was small and good. The story did not close. It settled.